Cold steel met old stone in the middle of a storm. Inside the ruined library of Reade Estate, Krista Vale stood in the mouth of a granite fireplace large enough for a man to sleep in. Rain struck the boarded windows. Wind came off the Atlantic and moved through the broken house in long, hollow breaths. She raised the chisel again. The tip scraped through a black line between two stones. At first, she thought it was mortar. The material curled away from the granite like old rubber. Krista froze. For 3 weeks, she had been sleeping on a cot in the kitchen of a mansion everyone in Oakhaven, Maine, had warned her to avoid. She had patched roof leaks with tarps. She had boiled coffee over a propane stove. She had mapped broken plumbing, dead wires, and rooms so cold her breath showed at noon. She thought the house was trying to defeat her with rot. Now she understood the house had been hiding something. The black line was not mortar. It was a seal. Behind the fireplace, inside a mansion sold to her for $1, there was a space that did not appear on any blueprint. Krista reached up into the chimney and gripped the old iron damper lever. It should have moved up or down. Instead, when she twisted it hard to the left, the lever sank into the wall with a heavy mechanical clack. Deep inside the stone, something massive woke up. The floor trembled under her boots. A low grinding sound moved through the library, slow and violent, as if the house itself had begun to shift its bones. The back wall of the fireplace started sliding sideways. A cold breath rolled out of the darkness. It smelled of old paper, dried leather, and gun oil. That was the moment Krista Vale realized Oakhaven had not sold her a haunted mansion. It had sold her a locked crime scene. 3 weeks earlier, the gavel struck a scarred oak podium in the basement of the Oakhaven Municipal Building. The sound was flat and hollow. Sold, the auctioneer said, without enthusiasm, to the lady in the back row for $1. Krista lowered her numbered paddle. Around her, the small crowd did not applaud. Contractors in work jackets leaned toward one another. A few townspeople whispered behind their hands. They looked at her not with envy, but with the particular pity people save for someone who has just made a mistake in public. Krista had bought Reade Estate. 74 rooms. A Gilded Age mansion perched on the jagged coastal cliffs of Maine. A slate roof bowed under decades of storms. Granite walls darkened by salt. Windows broken or boarded. Back taxes, code violations, demolition threats, and rumors that had outlived everyone who first told them. To Oakhaven, the estate was a burden. To Krista, it was the last door still open. 2 years earlier, she had been a respected architectural restorer in Boston. Krista was in her mid-30s, old enough to have built a reputation, and young enough to feel the humiliation of losing it before her life had truly settled. Her work had always been her proof. She was not loud. She did not sell herself well in rooms full of donors and developers. Put her inside an old building with a flashlight, a tape, and a set of drawings, and she could hear what the walls were trying to say. Her firm had restored townhouses, courthouses, churches, and private homes with carved staircases older than most cities. A business partner had changed all that. Accounts were emptied. Signatures were forged. Legal bills arrived before answers did. Clients disappeared. The bank took the office. By the time the newspapers stopped using her name, Krista had lost her savings, her firm, her apartment, and almost everything except an old pickup truck and her grandfather's antique tool collection. The Reade Estate auction was not a comeback. Not yet. It was a gamble. The price was $1, but the contract carried a brutal condition. Krista had 18 months to bring the property up to municipal code. If she failed, the town could seize what little she had left to cover demolition and emergency stabilization costs. $1 bought her the house. It also started the clock. After the auction, the town clerk approached with a stack of water-damaged blueprints and a heavy iron key. His name was Alden Mercer. He looked like a man designed by a filing cabinet. Beige suit. Pale hair. Thin mouth. Eyes that seemed to notice everything while giving away nothing. "You're a brave woman, Miss Vale," he said. Krista signed the last document. "Or perhaps an optimistic one," Mercer added. "I specialize in historic restorations," she said. "The house still has stone walls and old-growth timber. If the bones are sound, there's a way back." Mercer's smile tightened. "The bones may be sound. The history is another matter." He slid the blueprints closer. "The town has tried to offload that property for 30 years. Roof damage. Foundation concerns. No working plumbing. Electrical hazards. Possible trespassers in the carriage house. Some people say the place is cursed." Krista picked up the key. "The only ghosts I'm worried about are structural deficits." Mercer leaned in slightly. "Nicholas Reade did not build that house to host garden parties. He built it like a fortress. When he vanished in 1934, he left behind bad blood this town never quite washed out." That should have sounded like superstition. It did not. There was too much control in Mercer's voice. Too little performance. He was not telling a ghost story. He was placing a warning on the record. Krista took the key anyway. The drive to the estate carried her out of town and into a world of fog, black spruce, and coastal road cut hard against the cliffs. The Atlantic kept appearing between the trees, gray and restless, as if it were following her. When the iron gates finally rose out of the mist, Krista braked. Reade Estate did not look abandoned. It looked offended. The mansion loomed against the sky like a decaying cathedral. Ivy choked the granite walls. The slate roof sagged in 2 places. Towering windows stared down at the sea, dark and empty. A weathered carriage house leaned at the edge of the drive. Beyond it, the cliff fell away toward black rocks and white surf. Unlocking the front door took 10 minutes. The old iron key resisted. The lock scraped and ground. At last, the door gave way with a groan that moved through the foyer like an animal waking. Stagnant freezing air struck Krista in the face. The grand entrance had once been built to impress men who arrived by carriage and women wrapped in fur. Now it was a graveyard of opulence. A shattered chandelier lay across the marble checkerboard floor. Silk wallpaper peeled in long strips. Water stains spread across the walls like bruises. Broken glass crunched under her boots. Krista stood in the doorway and listened. The mansion answered with dripping water. One drop. Another. Somewhere deep in the house, a loose shutter knocked against its frame. For the first week, survival came before restoration. Krista chose the old kitchen because it still had a ceiling that did not leak directly onto the floor. She set up a camping cot beside a cold iron stove, stacked canned soup on a crate, and made instant coffee over a propane burner each morning before the sun cleared the trees. The work came in layers. First, she blocked the worst roof leaks with tarps. Next, she cleared the main hall so she could move without tripping over debris. After that, she started mapping hazards room by room. Dead outlets. Exposed wire. Molded plaster. Cracked joists. A staircase that sounded wrong on the 5th step. Every day, the house gave her another reason to quit. Every night, the contract reminded her she could not. 18 months. That was not a restoration timeline. That was a countdown. If she failed, she would not just lose the mansion. She would lose the truck. The tools. The last pieces of her grandfather's life. The last proof that she still belonged to the work. By the end of the 3rd week, Krista began building a digital model of the ground floor. The old blueprints were useful, but not trustworthy. Time changes buildings. Bad repairs change them more. She moved from room to room with her laser measure, notebook, and tablet, recording dimensions as precisely as she could. That was how she reached the West Wing library. The room stopped her before the numbers did. Even ruined, it had power. Floor-to-ceiling mahogany shelves lined the walls. Rotten leather chairs sat collapsed near the windows. Mold had clouded the ceiling medallion. At the northern end of the room stood the largest fireplace Krista had ever seen in a private house. It was built of dark Maine granite, rough-hewn and massive. The hearth was deep enough to stand inside. Above it, a solid oak mantel had been carved with a repeating pattern of maritime compasses and intertwined serpents. Nicholas Reade's crest. Krista had seen vanity carved into houses before. This was not vanity. This was a signature. She opened the 1912 blueprint on her tablet and checked the library measurements. 40 feet long. 30 feet wide. She placed the laser measure against the southern doorway and aimed it toward the fireplace wall. The red dot landed on the granite. The device beeped. 32 feet. Krista stared at the display. She checked the setting. Feet, not meters. The batteries were fine, but she changed them anyway. Again, she measured. 32 feet. From another angle. 32 feet. 8 feet were missing. In restoration, small errors can come from almost anything. Thick plaster. Bad drawings. Later renovations. A false wall added for pipes or ductwork. 8 feet across an entire 30-foot width was not a small error. It was a room. Krista walked outside into the cold rain and measured the exterior wall of the west wing. She counted the stone corbels. Checked the window spacing. Ran the tape along the foundation line as far as the brush allowed. The outside matched the blueprint. 40 feet. She went back inside and stood in the library, rainwater dripping from her jacket onto the ruined floor. Outside, the building said 40. Inside, the room said 32. The missing 8 feet sat directly behind the fireplace. Krista looked at the carved serpents on the mantel. The compass points. The massive granite chimney rising through the wall like a tower. Mercer's warning returned to her. Nicholas Reade did not build that house to host garden parties. He built it like a fortress. For the next 48 hours, the rest of the mansion faded. The roof still leaked. The deadline still waited. Winter was still only a month away. Krista's attention narrowed to the northern wall of the library. She tapped the granite blocks with a masonry hammer, listening for a hollow sound. Stone answered stone. Solid. Dense. Unmoving. She checked the bookshelves. Pulled swollen volumes from their places. Pressed carved panels. Studied the hearth floor. Looked for a seam, a hinge, a lever, any sign that the architecture had been asked to lie. Nothing moved. On the 24th night in the house, a storm came in hard from the Atlantic. Hail struck the boarded windows. Wind pushed through the broken frames. The tarp snapped above the west wing like sails on a ship. Krista set a battery-powered work light in the library and put on a respirator mask. The beam threw the fireplace into sharp relief, turning every carved serpent into a black shadow. She climbed into the hearth. Soot crunched under her boots. Animal bones, old ash, and pieces of fallen mortar lay in the corners. She aimed her flashlight up the chimney. The flue narrowed about 10 feet above her, just as it should. Nothing unusual there. The beam swept across the back wall of the firebox. Krista leaned closer. The mortar lines did not match. The side walls had gritty limestone mortar, cracked and crumbling with age. The back wall had thick, black seams between the granite blocks. Too black. Too smooth. She pressed the chisel into one of the seams and scraped. A curl of dark material peeled away. Not cement. Not mortar. Rubber. Old, hardened, carefully painted rubber. Krista stopped breathing for a second. The entire back wall of the fireplace was not a wall. It was a sealed slab. A hidden door built to survive smoke, heat, moisture, and time. She whispered into the empty hearth. "You clever old devil." If the fireplace concealed a door, there had to be a mechanism. A man like Nicholas Reade would not crawl behind a bookcase or trust a loose stone anyone could stumble across. He would build something close at hand, something disguised as part of the fireplace itself. Krista searched the mantel. She pressed serpent heads, compass points, carved knots in the oak. She pulled at the andirons. Checked the floor. Scraped around the edges of the hearth. Nothing. Hours passed. The storm deepened. Near 3 a.m, exhausted and covered in soot, she sat on the library floor and stared at the fireplace. If Reade had used this hidden space while people were in the library, he would have needed access quickly. The mechanism could not be across the room. It had to be reachable from inside the hearth. Krista stood. She climbed back into the fireplace and looked up. The damper lever hung just inside the flue. Heavy iron. Rusted. Ordinary. She pulled it down. The damper closed with a shriek of metal and a shower of soot. She pushed it up. It opened. Perfectly normal. Frustration rose in her chest. Krista gripped the lever with both hands and twisted it left. At first, nothing happened. The iron arm slid inward 2 inches and locked into the stone. A mechanical clack echoed behind the granite. Deep in the chimney breast, counterweights shifted. Steel tracks groaned. The floor trembled. Books fell from a shelf behind her. Krista stumbled out of the hearth as the entire back wall of the fireplace began to move. Slowly, painfully, the granite slab slid sideways into the left side of the chimney structure. The opening behind it was black. A cold current of dead air rolled into the library. Old paper. Dried leather. Gun oil. Krista picked up her flashlight. The beam shook slightly in her hand. Beyond the threshold, dust floated in air that had not moved in nearly 90 years. She stepped through the fireplace and into the dark. The first thing Krista noticed was the silence. Not the ordinary silence of an empty house. This was sealed silence. The kind that had weight. Behind her, the ruined library still groaned in the storm. Wind moved through cracked windows. Rain tapped against plywood. Somewhere above, loose slate shifted under the weather. Inside the chamber behind the fireplace, the air felt untouched. Her flashlight beam cut through darkness that had been waiting for nearly 90 years. Dust moved in slow, silver threads. The floor beneath her boots was hardwood, not stone. She lowered the light and saw narrow boards, polished dark with age, still clean beneath a thin skin of dust. No water stains. No animal tracks. No rot. The rubber seal behind the fireplace had done its job. The rest of Reade Estate had been dying in salt air and neglect. This room had been holding its breath. Krista stepped farther in. The hidden chamber ran the full width of the library wall, long and narrow, exactly where the missing 8 feet had been. The walls were paneled in cherry wood, rich and almost untouched. At the far end stood a steel vault door painted a deep olive green, its brass handle dulled by time. Faded gold lettering still clung to the surface. York Safe and Lock Company. Krista moved the flashlight across it slowly. A vault did not surprise her. Not now. Nicholas Reade had built a granite door into a fireplace. A man like that would not hide receipts in a shoebox. Still, the vault was not what pulled her forward. At the center of the chamber was a heavy executive desk. It sat exactly as someone had left it. A brass rotary telephone. Crystal decanters. A glass ashtray holding the fossilized stub of a cigar. A green banker's lamp with a cracked shade. Beside the lamp rested an old Colt pistol on a folded linen cloth. Krista did not touch the gun. Her attention went to the leather-bound ledger lying open in the center of the desk. The book looked too neat to belong in a ruin. Its pages were thick and yellowed. The ink had faded from black to brown. The handwriting was sharp, tight, and controlled, as if every word had been written by a man who believed the world should obey the pressure of his pen. Krista lifted the edge of one page with 2 fingers. She was careful. Paper can survive a century and still die in one careless second. The first entries looked like business accounts. Dates. Names. Payments. Delivery routes. The words were wrong for ordinary shipping. October 14, 1931. Shipment received through Blackwood Cove. 400 cases rye. Harbor Patrol paid. Weather favorable. Krista read the line twice. Rye. Not grain. Whiskey. A second entry followed 3 weeks later. State protection secured. Route 9 clear through Friday. Payment delivered in Portland. The room seemed colder. Krista had restored houses built by men who made money in railroads, timber, textiles, shipyards. She had seen fortunes presented in marble staircases and carved mantels, polished until the source of the money disappeared. This was different. This was the money before it became respectable. Prohibition. Canadian liquor. Harbor access. Local protection. She turned another page. The names began to repeat. Police Chief Harrow. Senator Calloway. Harbormaster Mercer. Krista stopped. Mercer. The names sat there in Nicholas Reade's own hand, dated more than 90 years earlier. Harbormaster Mercer demands a larger cut for night landings. Refused. Reminded him of the photographs from the Sterling Hotel. He will comply. Krista looked back toward the open fireplace. Alden Mercer had handed her the key. Alden Mercer had warned her the estate was rotten. Alden Mercer had smiled like a man watching a trap close. His family name was inside the ledger. Not as rumor. Not as town gossip. In ink. With dates. With payments. With blackmail. For a few seconds, Krista did not move. The discovery changed shape in front of her. A hidden room could be a curiosity. A vault could be a fortune. A ledger with the Mercer name inside it was something else. It was a bridge between the dead house and the living town. Krista turned more pages. At first, the ledger appeared to stay in the world of rum running. Boats from Halifax. Fishing crates that did not smell like fish. Night landings in coves where fog did half the work. Payments to men who wore badges by day and opened roads at night. The entries changed as the dates moved into 1934. Prohibition had ended, but the business had not. The language grew sharper. Municipal council nervous. They want distance now that the liquor money is gone. Fools. They forget who holds the deeds. Another line. Original transfers secured in New York. Copies distributed are worthless without my seal. Another. If Mercer, Harrow, and Calloway move against me, I will burn Oakhaven to the ground without striking a match. Krista stared at the words. He did not mean fire. He meant paper. Deeds. Photographs. Signed confessions. The kind of evidence that could collapse families without touching a wall. That was when she understood why the mansion had never been demolished. For 90 years, Oakhaven had called Reade Estate cursed. A death trap. A money pit. A place better left alone. Fear can be useful when it is pointed in the right direction. If the house stayed haunted in the public imagination, no one would measure the library. No one would question the fireplace. No one would search the walls with the patience of a woman who knew old buildings better than old rumors. Krista closed the ledger gently, then opened it again near the final pages. The last entry was dated October 28, 1934. The day Nicholas Reade vanished. They are coming tonight. Mercer, Harrow, Calloway. They think the vault can be opened without me. Let them try. The mechanism is locked. I will wait them out. Krista read the last sentence twice. I will wait them out. A simple problem rose in her mind. If Reade had locked himself inside this chamber, where was the body? She turned, sweeping the flashlight across the long room. No skeleton. No collapsed chair. No evidence of a man trapped in his own vault. Nicholas Reade had not died here. The hidden chamber had been built not only to protect secrets, but to survive an attack. Which meant it may have had another way out. Krista moved past the desk and between the stacked wooden crates lining the far wall. They were heavy shipping crates, tightly nailed shut and marked with faded paint. The insignia showed a Halifax fishing company, though the wood was too clean and the placement too careful. These crates had not been stacked in a hurry. Behind them, in the back corner of the chamber, her flashlight caught iron. A grate. It had been set into the floor and pulled loose, the hinges twisted outward. Krista crouched beside it. Below was a narrow stone-lined shaft descending into darkness. Cold air moved through it. Not house air. Sea air. Brine. Kelp. Wet stone. The tunnel led down toward the cliffs. Reade had escaped. Maybe he had planned it all along. Maybe he had known the men coming for him would search the room, the vault, the desk, and the crates, but never think to look beneath the floor. Or maybe he had left in panic, dragging the grate open while his enemies were still trying to force the granite wall. Either way, the house had kept his secret. Krista stood and looked back at the vault. Then at the ledger. Then at the crates. The room no longer felt like a tomb. It felt like a loaded weapon that had misfired in 1934 and stayed buried in the wall, waiting for the right hand to pull it free. She needed evidence. Not impressions. Not theories. Something she could take outside the town. Krista returned to the desk and slid the ledger carefully into the canvas tool bag at her hip. The bag was dusty and torn, but strong enough. Her grandfather had used it before she was born. It had carried chisels, hammers, hinges, brass knobs, and the small ordinary tools of restoration. Now it carried the kind of book that could rot a town from the inside out. She turned toward the crates. Part of her knew she should leave. Take the ledger. Get out. Drive straight to state authorities. Another part understood that if she left without knowing what else was in the chamber, Alden Mercer and whatever remained of his network would still have room to deny, delay, and explain. The vault was locked. The crates were not. Krista wedged her chisel under the lid of the nearest crate and pushed down. The nails resisted. She adjusted her grip, braced one boot against the crate, and pulled. The first nail screamed from the wood. Another followed. The lid cracked loose. Inside was oilcloth. Layer after layer, folded tight. Krista peeled it back with gloved hands. Her flashlight caught metal. Not coins. Not jewelry. Bars. Dozens of silver bars, stacked in careful rows, each one stamped with marks she did not recognize at first. European bank marks. Serial numbers. Symbols worn but still visible beneath a film of old oil. Krista did not breathe. In that moment, the room offered her the oldest temptation in any hidden house story. Treasure. The kind that could repair the roof, pay the code fines, save the estate, restore her life, and make the humiliation of the last 2 years disappear. For 1 second, she saw the simple version of the story. A ruined woman buys a ruined mansion for $1 and finds enough silver to begin again. It would have been easier if that were all. The ledger in her bag felt heavier than the silver. Money could explain greed. It could not explain 90 years of silence. A sharp sound came from the library. Krista killed the flashlight. Darkness swallowed the room. She stood frozen beside the open crate, one hand still resting on the oilcloth. The sound came again. Not wind. Not the house settling. A click. Mechanical. Modern. Footsteps moved across the marble foyer. Slow. Deliberate. Someone was inside Reade Estate. Krista moved away from the crate and pressed herself against the wall near the fireplace opening. Through the gap in the granite, she could see only a slice of the library. The broken shelves. The scattered books. The work light she had left burning on the floor. A beam of white light swept across the room. Not her light. Another flashlight. It moved over the bookshelves, down to the hearth, then stopped. The beam had found the open fireplace. The exposed iron tracks. The black gap. For several seconds, nothing happened. A voice filled the library. Well. Calm. Familiar. Almost amused. Alden Mercer stepped into view. He was not wearing the beige suit now. He wore a heavy canvas hunting jacket darkened by rain. His pale hair was flattened against his forehead. In his right hand, angled low but ready, was a modern hunting rifle. The barrel looked wrong in the old library. Too clean. Too current. A piece of the present carried into a room full of the past. My grandfather swore old Reade built a vault behind that chimney, Mercer said. My father thought he was chasing a family myth. He moved closer to the fireplace. I suppose I should thank you, Miss Vale. Krista stepped back into the dark chamber, careful not to let her boots scrape the floor. The ledger pressed against her hip inside the tool bag. Mercer's flashlight swept through the open threshold. The problem with professionals, he continued, is that eventually they find what everyone else missed. He was close now. Close enough that Krista could hear rain dripping from his jacket onto the library floor. Mercer looked into the hidden room but did not enter right away. Perhaps the darkness unsettled him. Perhaps even he understood that a secret can feel different once it is no longer under your control. You should have taken the warning, he said. You should have let the town condemn the place. Roof collapse. Foundation failure. Winter accident. There were so many clean ways for this to end. Krista kept her breathing slow. Her hand moved silently along the desk until her fingers touched cold metal. The old Colt. She picked it up. It was heavier than she expected. Mercer's light moved across the desk and caught the open crate. The beam stopped. For the first time, his voice changed. Oh, Nicholas, he whispered. You really did keep it. Greed can interrupt even fear. Mercer stepped into the chamber. The rifle remained in his hands, but his eyes were on the silver. That was when Krista understood the full trap. The town had never wanted Reade Estate restored. It had wanted the right person to fail. Someone desperate enough to take the risk. Skilled enough, perhaps, to find what the Mercer family had spent generations searching for. Expendable enough to disappear inside a condemned house. Mercer raised the rifle again. Come out, Krista, he said. His voice had lost the clerk's politeness. There is only one way in. Krista looked toward the back corner of the chamber. The torn iron grate. The stone-lined shaft. The smell of sea air. Mercer was wrong. There was another way out. It led into the dark below the house, toward a smuggler's tunnel that had not been used in 90 years. The secrets of Oakhaven were finally breathing again. The man sent to keep them buried was standing between her and the only safe way out. Krista kept the old Colt low at her side. Its weight gave her no comfort. A weapon kept in a sealed room for nearly 90 years was not a plan. It was an object from someone else's emergency, left behind on a desk beside a cigar stub and a dead telephone. Mercer took another step into the hidden chamber. His flashlight moved across the cherry paneling, the crates, the vault door, the desk, the open ledger marks in the dust where the book had been. His eyes paused there. He noticed the missing ledger. For the first time, fear crossed his face. Not fear of her. Fear of what she had already taken. Put the book down, Mercer said. Krista did not answer. She backed toward the far corner of the chamber, one slow step at a time. Mercer raised the rifle. The movement was controlled, almost formal. He had spent his life behind counters, forms, minutes, records, and official seals. The rifle removed the last disguise. There was no clerk now. No town servant. No polite warning about ghosts. Only a man guarding the inheritance of corruption. Krista's thumb found the safety on the Colt. She pushed it down. The metal gave a small dry click. Mercer stopped. For half a second, the room held still. Krista gripped the slide and tried to chamber around. Nothing moved. She pulled harder. Still nothing. The mechanism was frozen solid, locked by time, old oil, and the fine invisible damage of salt air that had found its way even into this sealed place. The gun was useless. Mercer saw it. His face changed again. This time, he smiled. "Old houses disappoint people," he said. Krista set the pistol down silently on the desk behind her. Her hand found the canvas strap of the tool bag against her hip. The ledger was inside. That mattered more than the silver. More than the house. More than the rifle in front of her. Alden Mercer could explain a trespasser. He could explain an accident. He could explain a restoration worker killed in a condemned mansion during a storm. He could not explain Nicholas Reade's ledger in front of state investigators. Krista looked past him toward the fireplace opening. Too far. Too exposed. He had the only clean way out covered. Behind her, the broken floor grate waited in the corner. Cold sea air breathed up from below. Mercer followed her eyes. His smile disappeared. "Don't," he said. Krista moved. She grabbed the work light from the desk and flung it toward the crates. It struck wood and burst into hard white glare, throwing shadows across the chamber. Mercer flinched toward the light. Krista ran for the shaft. A flat crack cut through the room. Wood splintered from the cherry panel beside her shoulder. The sound was small, almost swallowed by the storm, but the hole it left was real. Krista reached the grate and dropped feet first into darkness. For one awful instant, there was no floor. Her boots hit a steep stone chute slick with moisture and age. She slid downward, one hand scraping against the wall, the other clamped around the tool bag at her hip. Stone tore at her sleeve. Cold air rushed past her face. Above, Mercer shouted something she could not hear over the roar rising from below. The chute leveled suddenly. Krista hit wet rock hard enough to knock the breath out of her. For several seconds, she could not move. The sound around her was enormous. Water. Not dripping water. The ocean. She pushed herself up on one elbow and switched on her heavy mag light. The beam cut through a cavern beneath the estate. The smuggler's tunnel opened into a natural sea cave carved into the cliff. Black water surged through a wide mouth in the rock, crashing against stone and throwing white spray into the darkness. The air smelled of brine, kelp, iron, and rot. Along the right wall, a narrow wooden boardwalk clung to the cavern on rusted brackets. Beyond it, stairs had been cut into the cliff face, rising toward a faint line of gray light. An exit. Not an easy one. An exit. Krista forced herself to stand. Her knee hurt. Her palms were raw. The tool bag was still there. The ledger was still inside. Above her, a flashlight beam appeared in the shaft. Mercer was coming down. Krista moved toward the boardwalk. The first plank shifted under her boot. She froze. The wood was old, blackened with salt and time. Some planks had split down the grain. Others had warped upward like ribs. Iron bolts had bloomed with rust where they entered the stone. This passage had been built by men who expected to move crates at night and keep their names out of ledgers. It had not been built to survive a century. Mercer landed at the bottom of the chute behind her. His flashlight swept the cave. "You can't outrun this, Krista," he called. His voice echoed strangely, broken by water and stone. She did not answer. Speed would kill her as surely as the rifle. Another crack struck the rock near the boardwalk. Stone chips cut across her cheek. Krista ducked behind a tall formation of wet stone rising from the cavern floor. Her breath came hard. She tasted blood where a fragment had opened her skin. Mercer advanced slowly. He had the rifle. He had the light. Down here, he did not understand the room. That was the difference. Krista had spent her life listening to old structures. A sagging roof spoke before it failed. A stair tread gave warning in the way it bent. Masonry told the truth through cracks. Water marked its path even when people tried to paint over it. In the cave, the structure was talking. Mercer stepped onto the old boardwalk without looking down. That was his mistake. Krista saw the warning before he did. The center support beneath him was split through the grain, black with rot where salt water had eaten into the timber. Every wave made the boardwalk shudder. Every step Mercer took pushed more weight onto a structure that had been failing for decades. She did not need to defeat him. She needed the cave to tell the truth. Krista swung the beam of her mag light into his eyes. Mercer flinched and shifted his weight. The boardwalk answered with a crack. A deep wooden sound moved through the cavern. The support buckled. Planks folded under him, and a shelf of loose shale broke away from the wall. Mercer dropped hard against the collapsed boards, pinned beneath timber and rock, his rifle sliding into the tidal pool below. The collapse was not large enough to bring down the cliff. It was enough to stop him. The cave filled with dust, spray, and Mercer's ragged cry. Krista stayed behind the rock until the last stones stopped falling. Her hands shook around the flashlight. When she stepped out, Mercer was alive. Pinned. Furious. Terrified. The tide had begun to push water higher around the rocks, but the ledge beneath him still held. He was not drowning. He was not free. "You don't know what this town is," Mercer gasped. Krista walked close enough for him to see her face. "I know what it keeps." He coughed, eyes burning with hatred. "You think a ledger changes anything?" Krista looked toward the stairs cut into the cliff. "No," she said. "But it opens the first door." She left him there. The climb out of the sea cave nearly broke her. The stairs were steep, wet, and uneven, carved into the cliff by men who never expected daylight to judge their work. Twice, Krista had to stop and press her shoulder against the stone until the dizziness passed. Her knee throbbed with every step. Her cheek stung. Her lungs burned from cold air and fear. At the top, she emerged into a gray Maine dawn. The storm had weakened into hard mist. Reade Estate stood above her, dark against the sky, its broken windows facing the ocean like witnesses that had kept silent too long. Krista did not go back inside. She did not drive to the Oakhaven police station. If the ledger was right, the local system had been compromised long before Alden Mercer was born. The names had changed. The offices had not. She drove south in her battered pickup with the heater barely working, the canvas tool bag on the passenger seat, and Nicholas Reade's ledger wrapped in an old towel to protect it from the damp. In Portland, she asked for state authorities. Not local. State. At first, the desk officer looked at her muddy clothes and bleeding face as if she had brought a ghost story into a government building. Krista did not try to make it sound dramatic. She opened the ledger. Dates. Names. Payments. Deeds. Blackmail. The room changed after that. By mid-morning, a convoy of state police vehicles was moving up the coastal road toward Reade Estate. Krista stood near her pickup wrapped in a thermal blanket, holding a paper cup of black coffee that tasted burnt and wonderful. Agent Sarah Whitaker arrived with the second wave. She was in her 40s, composed, sharp-eyed, and careful with silence. She wore gloves before touching the ledger. That small act made Krista trust her more than anything she said. "This is original?" Whitaker asked. It was in the room behind the fireplace. "And Mercer?" "Pinned in the sea cave. Alive." Whitaker looked toward the cliffside mansion. For the first time since Krista had bought the estate, someone in authority looked at the house not as a nuisance, not as a curse, not as a demolition problem. As evidence. State troopers secured the library. A rescue team descended into the sea cave and brought Alden Mercer out on a stretcher, soaked, injured, and silent. He asked for an attorney before he asked about the silver. That told Agent Whitaker something. The hidden chamber was photographed before anyone moved through it. The desk. The crates. The York vault. The cigar stub. The old Colt. The rubber-sealed granite door. Every object received a number. Every number went into a chain of custody. The process was slow. Krista found comfort in that. For 2 years, her life had been ruined by signatures, accounts, and documents twisted by someone else. Now documents were being handled with care. Every glove, every photograph, every evidence tag felt like a small act of repair. The vault took hours. A safe specialist from Boston arrived just before sunset. He worked under portable lights while Whitaker read selected pages of Reade's ledger at a folding table in the library. When the York vault finally opened, it did not reveal stacks of cash. It revealed files. Hundreds of them. Original property deeds. Signed transfers. Photographs. Confessions. Maps. Ledger copies. Private letters. The records appeared to show land taken from families who had never had the money to fight town hall. Harbor rights transferred under pressure. Farms lost after tax notices went missing. Widows bought out for pennies. Fishermen pushed off coves their families had worked for decades. The silver in the crates was valuable. The paper in the vault was explosive. Nicholas Reade had been no hero. He had trafficked liquor, bought officials, threatened rivals, and built his fortune in shadows. The evidence survived not because Reade cared about justice, but because he trusted no one enough to destroy his leverage. That was the moral knot at the center of Reade Estate. A corrupt man had preserved the truth for selfish reasons. A respectable town had buried it for respectable ones. For weeks, the story widened. The first official statements were careful. They called it an investigation into historical property fraud and modern municipal misconduct. They did not use the word conspiracy at first. Institutions rarely do until the evidence leaves them no smaller word. Alden Mercer was charged. Other names followed. Some were living. Some were dead. Some belonged to families whose portraits still hung in banks, law offices, and town buildings around Oakhaven. The case did not repair the past overnight. No case can. Land taken a century earlier does not simply return because a vault opens. Families scatter. Records decay. Descendants lose names, language, and proof. The law can recognize injury long after it loses the power to make anyone whole. Recognition still matters. Files were copied. Claims were reviewed. State historians entered the chamber with archivists. The old story of Oakhaven began to change. For 90 years, people had said Reade Estate was cursed. Now they had to say what kind of curse it had been. Not ghosts. Records. Not spirits. Signatures. Not bad luck. A system built to make theft look official. 18 months after Krista bought the mansion for $1, the West Wing was no longer a condemned shell. It was stabilized, inspected, and open in a limited way to the public, while the larger restoration continued around it. The slate roof was repaired in sections. The granite joints had been repointed where the storms had done the worst damage. The library, once the heart of the secret, became the first room Oakhaven was forced to enter honestly. Krista did not become rich in the simple way people expected from a treasure story. The silver became evidence first. Then property of a process larger than her own need. There were grants. Legal agreements. Preservation funds. Work contracts. Enough money, eventually, to keep Reade Estate standing and keep Krista working. Not a fairy tale fortune. Something more durable. A restored name. A second chance earned in public. She petitioned to have the estate recognized not for its beauty alone, but for what it revealed about power, property, and memory on the Maine coast. The hidden room was not sealed again. Krista refused that. The granite fireplace remained, but the mechanism was disabled and stabilized. Visitors could stand in the restored library and see the dark opening behind the hearth through a protective glass barrier. Inside, Nicholas Reade's desk sat where Krista had found it. The rotary phone. The lamp. The ashtray. The old Colt, locked and tagged, no longer pretending to be protection. At the center of the exhibit, under controlled light, rested the ledger. The leather cover was cracked. The pages were fragile. The handwriting still looked sharp enough to cut. People came expecting silver. Most left looking at paper. That was the strange power of the room. It taught them that history does not always hide in battlefields or monuments. Sometimes it hides in county records, tax notices, harbor permits, forged transfers, and family names repeated so often they begin to sound like geography. A house can be haunted by documents. A fireplace can be a door. Krista often returned to the library before opening hours. She would stand where she had stood that storm night, facing the granite hearth, remembering the first curl of black rubber peeling away under her chisel. $1 had bought her a condemned mansion. It had also bought her a question. What if the thing everyone calls worthless is only the thing powerful people need ignored? Reade Estate had once been a fortress for secrets. Then it became a ruin built out of fear. Now it stood as something else. Not purified. Not innocent. No honest restoration pretends the damage never happened. The work is to make the damage visible, to hold the repaired beam beside the scar, to let the old wall speak without covering every crack. That became Krista's real restoration. Not the roof. Not the library. Not even her career. She restored the right of a town to know what had been done in its name. Alden Mercer had spent his life guarding a sealed room. Nicholas Reade had spent his life filling it. Krista Vale opened it. In the end, the most valuable thing behind the fireplace was not the silver, the vault, or the mansion itself. It was the ledger in the glass case. A record of names. A map of theft. A warning. Old houses do not keep secrets because they want to. They keep them because people do. Until someone measures the room, notices what is missing, and refuses to stop at the wall.